past 2 years, we've seen a lot of corporate restructuring behind the scenes of comic book movies. Warner Brothers has gone insane and decided to just start shelving movies that were completely filmed and nearly done in post-production as a way to distance themselves from their previous comic book cinematic universe. This radical and almost unprecedented decision left dozens of cast members and hundreds of crew members completely baffled, as something they spent hundreds or thousands of hours working on is never going to see the light of day. This has happened twice now and almost happened to that Crypto and Scooby-Doo movie, setting a dangerous new status quo that you could make an entire professional studio film and then just have the whole thing thrown in the trash. Between Batgirl being lost media and the ongoing Wile E. Coyote fiasco, this has all gotten me thinking about another situation very similar from a few decades ago. Roger Corman's Fantastic Four. A movie that was planned to be scrapped even before it was filmed. A movie where an entire passionate and talented cast and crew poured their hearts and souls into a love letter to Lee and Kirby's first family of Marvel Comics before it was sealed away in a vault with the intention of never seeing the light of day. But thankfully, it's a movie that by today, anyone can go watch anytime they like. This is the first Fantastic Four movie, and it's actually pretty good. And this is the story of the dedicated cast and crew who were tricked into making it. Hey, let's just take a quick intermission. Do you like Spider-Man? Do you like video games? Well, on March 1st, I'm going to be hosting a live autograph signing stream exclusively on my channel with the cast of Marvel Spider-Man 2. Najee Jeter, Stephen O. Young, Jim Peary, my boy Yuri Lowenthal, and even the great Tony Todd will all be there. If you go to my link in the description, you can purchase an autograph from one, two, or all of them to sign during the event, and then mail straight to your door after it's over. You can personalize the autographs or have them made out to a friend or family member as a gift. During the signing, I'll be interviewing the cast of the game, so post some of your burning questions you'd like to ask each of them here in the comments, and I'll take a couple of good ones into account and ask them during the stream. Don't forget, it's on March 1st, and you won't want to miss this. Pre-sales are in the link in the description. Buying any of the autographs is a great way to support the cast and me if you want to do that, if you think I'm cool, if you like me. So don't miss out! Despite the ill-fated Fantastic Friends Who Fight Fiends never getting an official theatrical release, copies of the finished film have been circulating for decades in bootleg VHS tapes and DVDs, and it even wound up on YouTube where no one actually cares enough about it to take it down. I've heard about the movie hundreds of times since I was a kid, and weirdly it was always in a derogatory context like, it was so bad they never put it out, or wow, this movie sure is embarrassing because it doesn't have modern CGI. It seemed like this weird punching bag for pre-2000s Marvel movies, but I think that's actually punching down. Sure, everything before Spider-Man and X-Men was pretty shaky, but would you believe me if I told you that after watching this in full, I think it's one of the stronger live-action Marvel movies from that time period. I mean, it's certainly better than Howard the Duck. I see a lot more reverence for the iconography of the comics in this than the Punisher who was too embarrassed to wear a skull t-shirt. And there's some really ambitious practical effects in there that I think are pretty fascinating to look at. It'll never be 1990 TMNT, but that's a high bar. This movie doesn't deserve the reputation that it's got. This is far from the worst Marvel movie ever made. Shit, this isn't even the worst Fantastic Four movie ever made. The plot is that Reed Richards and Victor Von Doom are two college roommates conducting a science experiment to harness the power of a passing comet called Colossus. They live in a boarding house with Susan and Johnny Storm and hang out with their less scientifically minded buddy Ben Grimm. The age difference between Reed and Sue in the flashback is super weird. I don't like that. He's in college and she looks 12. I know it's from the comics, but you could have skipped that. Oh, John Byrne wrote this. Look how completely surprised I am. In order to make this less terrifying, I'm gonna headcanon that he's a 19-year-old sophomore and she's a 17-year-old extremely late bloomer with a hormone deficiency that didn't correct itself until a little bit later. At least the movie and the comics make it clear that they didn't keep in contact at all for that entire 10-year gap before the rest of the movie. Padme and Anakin type beat, I guess. Anyway, the experiment goes wrong and burns Victor horribly, then he fakes his own death to hide his deformity. Oh god! Yeah, that happened to my buddy Josh one time. After 10 years of mourning the apparent death of their friend Victor, The comet returns to Earth and Ben convinces Reed to bring the now grown-up Susan and Johnny on a once-in-a-lifetime mission to try the experiment again in space. But this little goober man, silly little dude guy that's clearly supposed to be Mole Man, but they couldn't get the rights, steals a component out of their spaceship that would shield them from cosmic radiation. Then they're blasted with space energy that mutates them in ways that fit their personalities.
Johnny, you've always had a quick temper. Now, come on, ever since I've known you, right? You could call it fiery, so what happens?
I catch fire.
Exactly.
And you know the rest. A pretty standard Fantastic Four origin story ensues. Well, it's standard now, but back then, this was one of the first really faithful comic adaptations. Dare I say, I think of all the Fantastic Four movies, this is the one that sticks closest to the comics and treats that material with the most respect. You can tell they really did their homework when cranking out that script. You know, they only got 4 drafts, but damn it, they tried. If you tell me The Incredibles is the best Fantastic Four movie, I'm gonna wrap your head in a vice and pop your eyes out of your head. Just like stunt actor Carl Ciarfalio, who also played the Thing in this movie. I mean, it's not exactly an all-time definitive classic. There's lots of things wrong with it, from the cheap production values to the messy audio quality to some of the script being a little wonky in places. But one thing you could never say was the problem with this movie is the cast. I was blown away by how good the casting was for this movie, because everyone does such a great job embodying the characters they play, and they have this underdog dynamic as a team that plays well off each other. All 4 of these actors, despite not being big names, look and act just like the characters. Like, Michael Bailey Smith looks exactly how they draw Ben Grimm in the comics. Alex Hyde White also has so much charisma as Reed Richards and really gives you this kindly patriarch of the family kind of vibe.
You think you can keep that fire of yours going a little while longer? We might need it, pal.
Like, he's just a really nerdy, nice dad that wants what's best for everyone in his brood. Jay Underwood's Johnny Storm has that perfect balance of being cocky without being a jerk. He definitely comes across as confident and snarky, but you know he's a good guy deep down.
Flame off! Flame off! Flame off! I guess we figured out the magic words, huh, Doc?
Rebecca Staub's take on Sue Storm is cool because she's got this infectious, positive attitude, and I love the scene where she sews up the Fantastic Four's original costumes by hand and gives them out to the team. All 4 of them are perfectly suited to their characters in the team, and they have a really likable chemistry. I'd also like to give props to the first live-action Doctor Doom, Joseph Culp. Of all of our live-action Dooms, he's somehow the only one that's played him as this theatrical, ostentatious despot that commands a following of loyal subjects. The fact that Doom is the ruler of his own country is so important, but seems bizarrely overlooked in the other 2 adaptations, so it's cool that it's represented here. From the stories they've told and the way they all talked about these characters, I genuinely believe these actors all became fans of the Fantastic Four and really cared about the comics.
I didn't know that much about Fantastic Four, so I needed to do a little research. And I went to this comic book store.
So a funny thing happened to me when we'd finished the film. I found out that I really liked this character.
I think the cast members for this film, particularly all the leads, were so genuinely involved in the characters of the Fantastic Four.
And not that fake-ass millionaire Hollywood actor who wouldn't wipe their ass with a comic trying to pose with one for nerd cred on an Instagram post kind of way. It wasn't fashionable to give a damn about the funny pages back then. There was no insatiable internet fandom to look good for. This stuff was so niche, they didn't have to read this at all. But they did. The mainstream considered comic books childish garbage that turned kids into no-good commies that don't eat their vegetables.
We were trying really as hard as possible to remain faithful, basically the Jack Kirby era, where we tried to copy as closely as possible that look, because we kind of felt that was the definitive, classic, period. But with The Thing and with Dr. Doom, Kirby was the era that we were really kind of striving for and was our major source of inspiration.
The mainstream still doesn't care about comics, but they pretend to now. And despite the low-budget approach, I also have to commend how good The Thing and Doom costume designs actually look. Sure, I can tell Doom's armor is made of plastic, but by God, this is the most faithful cinematic Doctor Doom costume we've had. While Culp is having a hell of a time acting through all that heavy armor, it doesn't really show in the performance. He moves in it like he's used to it.
You have 12 hours to surrender yourself.
He drew 12! Did he? He did it! That's adorable!
I think I may have just the thing. Just the thing. Cut to.
The costume for the Thing is also really impressive for the time. It's not quite on the level of something like the Henson Company's Ninja Turtles like a few years before this, but the mask is capable of emoting well enough to show him looking angry and really depressed. He's got Ben Grimm's trademarked anguish down, and he's pretty nimble in the fight scenes. If you watch the more HD copy of the movie available out there, you can see his costume has some really great texture to it that I think makes him look more stone-like than even the material for the 2005 costume. Though that one was still just a better costume overall. I also really like the effect of him transforming from the Thing back into Ben Grimm when Doom makes his powers malfunction. It's a really solid transformation sequence. The only issue between Doom and the Thing is that the ever-loving blue-eyed guy gets to have his lines redubbed in post-production with a really clear-sounding voice, and Doom does not. It seems like they just used the audio recorded on set, much to Joseph Culp's chagrin. He actually asked if he could go back in and redub the voice lines like they did with the Thing, and they said no.
I really liked the sound of your voice in the mask, and when I came to the looping session and I heard it, and I went, oh no, the sound of the mask is not good. I don't know. That was a judgment call that I never agreed with.
I guess it wasn't in the budget. So sometimes he sounds pretty good if he's projecting his voice loudly enough, but other times it sounds so muffled you can't tell what he's saying.
Well, if you can't appreciate the irony, at least maybe.
Yep, that's how world leaders talk, all right.
Used to make beer brewed here. It is used to make the brew beer in this.
I can't say the costumes for the rest of the four are the best put together, but they at least have the in-universe excuse of being made by So suing them herself. Like in issue 3 of the comic book. So you could kind of consider them like the prototype costumes that everyone insists are so important in comic book movies, like the Frank Reynolds suit from Homecoming. But even then, despite the fact that it's hand-sewn spandex, I'd still argue it's the best Fantastic Four costume design in any of the movies. Nice and simple, straightforward. I never liked the way the 2005 version pushed the logo off to the side like a tiny badge. That's a lack of conviction. It stinks of cowardice. Too afraid to look silly. The costumes in the 2015 movie are a joke, and that thing John Krasinski wore in Doctor Strange is like the ultimate generic modern superhero suit. If you swap the blue parts to red, it could be Ant-Man, Deadpool, or Daredevil. If you made it yellow and blue, it'd be Wolverine's new costume. They started getting so homogenous that simple and iconic designs straight out of the comics are a refreshing change. So it's nice to go back to the olden days and see something that looks like it was made by a real human being. Like the Final Swing suit, or Peacemaker and Vigilante, Aquaman, Stargirl, or Blue Beetle. You know what? DC's actually kind of taken the lead in terms of quality of costumes lately. The key isn't just to slap random panels and lines and mechanical detailing everywhere, it's just to take the design from the comics and make it with some nice materials that look sturdy. Maybe something with some good texture so it photographs well. Basically what I'm saying is the perfect Fantastic Four costume would look like the 90s one, but made out of whatever the hell material that John Krasinski thing was made of. Bada bing bada boom, looking actually fantastic.
Say that again?
All this has got me thinking about the upcoming MCU Fantastic Four, and I'm just so tired, man. It's gonna cost like $500 million, but look like a PS3 game like all of them lately, and the writers and the cast aren't going to give a damn about the Fantastic Four, but they'll fake their way through it in interviews, and then it's gonna really show in the movie. It's gonna be so sad. This take on the Fantastic Four also tries their absolute damnedest to portray everyone's powers accurately to the best of their ability with the limited budget and rudimentary digital effects of the time. I think it generally all looks decent when Human Torch and Invisible Woman use their powers. You know, the invisibility works well enough, and I can tell they used some practical fire where it was available, or at least they got the little touches with the lighting right when his hands light up. The only place where you could tell it was a struggle was Mr. Fantastic's stochastic elastic procedure feels enthusiastic but ultimately monastic compared to his classic, dynastic, and flammable yet gymnastic compatriots. It looks silly when he tries to stretch. It's like a glove on a rod. Even 30 years later, this power set is really hard to do on a smaller budget, so the Ms. Marvel show didn't even bother. The part that looks most off about it to me is that no matter what outfit he's wearing, his clothes always stretch along with his limbs. Even though that baggy hazmat suit ain't made of no unstable molecules. I think it looks good in this faraway shot of him punching Doom at the end, but that's the only instance.
I did see the limousine shot as it drove away and this big bendy arm come up, and I went, oh, that's interesting.
There's also a scene at the end where the Human Torch fully lights up his body into his all-fire form, and he flies after a huge super weapon that Doom has fired on New York City. Look, I can't say this is good. I can't even say it's good for 1994. Jurassic Park came out in 1993. We know what CGI looked like at the time, or at least expensive CGI. However, I can say that I admire how ambitious it was for them to even attempt a scene like this with resources that limited. A fully CGI character front and center in a major action set piece was not commonplace in this time period, so they were really swinging for the fences. I really enjoy the section in the middle after their ship crashes and they're stranded with no sign of rescue. It might seem like it goes on a little long, but I like that it gives the characters time to talk about what they're going through, and it gives this feeling that it's them against the world. There's nothing about them getting their powers that's overtly creepy beyond the concept itself, but I think this is a better attempt at the body horror element than the 2015 movie because they got the feel of body horror right. The team are sitting there alone in the dark wilderness, frightened and disturbed by what's happening to them, and they aren't sure if this is only the beginning. They speculate that they might even keep changing, and they're terrified together.
God help us.
Ben's change was heavily delayed, so he's just sitting there worried about his friends, thinking there's nothing wrong with him, when he's got it worse than all of them. This section is great at capturing the essence of body horror without actually going for the shock value or gore like most obvious examples. It's about the characters taking the time to be scared of a forced transformation of their biology that they didn't want or intend. And in that regard, I think Fant4stic dropped the ball by comparison when it comes to capturing that same feeling. The pacing has some of the same issues that plague most superhero origin movies. They spend so much time focusing on the origin story itself that the movie only has a few minutes left by the time it's all sort of been settled. There isn't really a proper fight scene until about an hour in, but given their limitations, I think it's fine that they didn't try to shove an awkward action scene into an inappropriate moment earlier on. It's unfortunate that the Mole Man wasn't legally available for them to use as a secondary antagonist because you can really feel his absence in the movie. In his place is this cult leader guy named the Jeweler, who has an army of vagrants that follow him, and you just know he was meant to be like a cave-dwelling creep with an army of subterranean chud monsters to do his bidding. The way they changed Mole Man into the Jeweler may be an easier pill to swallow in terms of quote-unquote realism and keeping the plot simple, but it would have been more interesting. He has this subplot of kidnapping Alicia Masters, the Thing's longtime love interest from the comics. It does give Mr. Grimm something to do during the second act slump when he realizes he's got to save Alicia from him, but like I said, it just would have been cooler for him to fight mole monsters instead of just normal-ass guys. Oh, how often comic book movies and shows were made less cool by the old "we couldn't get the rights" dilemma. There's something just so infectious about this movie's reverence for the characters and its hopeful tone. For the first 30 minutes leading up to them finally getting powers, there's a lot of scenes where everything just busts out into this super sentimental music and the characters are just admiring each other or the situation they're in, and my cynical 2020s brain wanted to reject it because anger and hate are all that sustains us now. But eventually the score won me over.
Look at you. The Fantastic Four.
Everyone's smiling and having a good time, the characters love and support each other. There's just not a drop of meanness in the entire movie. It's so optimistic. That's not to say there's no drama in the movie. The Thing is struggling here in a way that's faithful to the character, but the other characters respond to his struggle with so much love and kindness. Like, they wouldn't abandon him for a second, even if he's in a really bad place emotionally. I'm so used to and then the characters have a big argument and say mean things to each other at the end of the second act. You know, that scene that's in every superhero team-up movie ever. But the rest of the team wants nothing but the best for Ben Grimm, and he storms off on his own despite them being totally there for him. I like that they didn't have to have a big forced argument. He just needed some time alone to process everything. And everyone coming together in the end to go to Latveria and beat Doom's ass was a great moment. By God, I was actually invested in these guys and rooting for them. I'd go so far as to call this a feel-good movie because of how upbeat it is. And that's just something I haven't seen in a while for live-action superheroes. My biggest takeaway from this version of the Fantastic Four is that just by watching it, you know everyone below the line on this production was putting in their best effort. Every little aspect of this movie bleeds love for the Fantastic Four and their comics. This movie was made with so much sincerity and honesty, despite the reason it existed at all being one big lie. Getting feature films made about Marvel Comics wasn't really a huge priority in the 80s for Marvel. They were doing just fine with the sales of the comics, merchandise, and animated series. But in 1983, Stan Lee was approached by a German director and producer named Bernd Eichinger. Eichinger wanted to buy the film rights to the Fantastic Four to use in a high-budget, star-studded Hollywood feature film, not unlike Richard Donner's mega-hit blockbuster Superman. It wasn't until later, in 1986, when he finally secured the license, just as Tim Burton's Batman film was about to start coming together, and further incentivize Hollywood to start digging deeper into the world of Cape Comics for certified box office bangers. Marvel was selling the rights to all of their characters for film and TV options for ridiculously low prices, with the intent of reaching an even wider audience. Making movies based on Marvel stuff wasn't exactly a huge trend at the time, so you have to admire the man's foresight in grabbing it up early, knowing that this IP would be valuable one day. Eichinger was the CEO of the German film studio Constantine Films, and had plans to eventually turn the FF into something big enough to rival the likes of Batman and Superman. But there's a catch. Eichinger's ownership of the Fantastic Four option has an expiration date baked in as a safety precaution on Marvel's part so they don't permanently lose a say in the cinematic interpretations of their characters. If Eichinger didn't have a Fantastic Four movie of some kind in production by December 31st, 1992, he'd lose the rights. He asked Marvel for an extension on his time limit because he couldn't nail down any financial backers to make this ultra-expensive movie at the time, and Marvel went, "Oh shit, we just sold the rights to all of our characters for ridiculously low prices. Batman is over here making $1 zillion and we probably could have gotten a lot more. That was a goof." So they decided not to extend his deadline.
You know how much I sacrificed?
So Eichinger came up with a plan. The contracts didn't say the Fantastic Four movie had to be a big-budget blockbuster. It didn't even need to actually come out. He just needed to be working on it by the time of this deadline. The plan? Extend the film license for the Fantastic Four by another decade by making a fake movie for no money at all and then throwing it in the trash the second it's done.
That movie was never supposed to be shown to anybody. This fellow had the rights to do the Fantastic Four movie for like 15 years, and finally the option was due to lapse. If he hadn't begun principal photography by December, he would lose that option, and he still wanted to make that movie. So he figured he would bat out a fast movie for a $1.98 budget just so he could keep that option. The tragic thing is that the people involved with the film were not aware that the movie was never supposed to be shown to anybody. Do you see? It was never supposed to be seen by any living human beings.
Who better to make a cheap-ass, super-quick movie than Roger Corman, the king of B-movies? His whole gimmick was making cheap-ass, super-quick movies. He writes, casts, produces, films, edits, and releases a cheap-ass, super-quick movie before breakfast in the morning. To this date, Corman has produced nearly 500 movies. The guy's a machine. Eichinger went to him, told him he had the opportunity of a lifetime. Make me a cheap-ass, super-quick Fantastic Four movie before the 31st. Corman was like, shit, okay, give me $1 million and we can start on December 26th, I guess. Jesus, this is gonna be crazy. Even with inflation, that's like $2 million and some change by today's standards. Practically nothing when compared to $225 million they used to make something light on fight scenes like She-Hulk. And ironically, by this point, this was the most expensive movie that Corman's studio had ever done.
Produced by Imagine Entertainment, when during Imagine's Christmas party, a drunk lawyer reminded them they'd lose the rights if they didn't make the film in the next 6 days. After a 2-hour search, they found their entire cast. They also proved useful 6 days later at the wrap party.
The casting process was quick, and while these actors were picked because they were cheap and easy to get, all of them had the idea that this was going to be their big break. The leads took their roles very seriously. They read Stan and Jack's old books to research the characters. Dr. Doom's actor based his performance on real-life tyrants like Mussolini. I mean, sure, the studio they were filming at was clearly like an old decaying lumber yard where the roof was about to cave in on them, and the set was covered with rats. But they just assumed that the cheapness of the production would yield an even greater profit when this thing finally hit theaters. Stan Lee even visited the set a few times, and that got everyone way more jazzed. Even though everything pointed to this being like a hack job, they clung to the belief that there was some level of legitimacy to make this all worth the grueling effort that it took. The crew of this movie worked their asses off to film the whole thing in less than a month, either 21 or 25 days depending on who you ask. The composers, David and Eric Wurst, spent $6,000 of their own money to rent out a 40-piece orchestra to make the lovably sentimental score. And after the movie was done filming, it seemed like the project was just abandoned, and the cast and crew were left hanging and wondering what the hell was going on.
They just kind of let it languish in post for some reason. We were scratching our heads going, wait a minute, Roger's cut a trailer. He's showing a trailer in the movie theaters. But why are we not finishing the movie?
The director, Oli Sassone, wasn't even sure why it felt like none of the producers cared what happened next. So he went out of his way to edit the movie himself after hours in the editing bay of another movie he was hired to work on.
While I was editing that movie, after everybody left the production office, I'd take that movie off the flatbed reels and put the Fantastic Four up. So we were actually posting and finishing the movie sort of in a clandestine sort of operation.
The crew were having to borrow camera equipment from other productions and shoot extra scenes to make the final edit more clear with no permits, by themselves, after the movie was technically wrapped.
There was no more money coming from Corman. It was over. It was just, and we just finished it.
Even though it was left clearly with the intent to just die in the editing room, they kept working on it and refining it as best they could. Alex Hyde White and Michael Bailey Smith spent thousands of dollars of their own money creating a makeshift promotional press tour and went out with the other actors to fan signings and convention appearances so they could drum up as much hype as possible. Because, again, they were under the impression that this was still going to come out.
We went to a convention in Florida, we went to Charlotte, I can't remember. The Thing head would be, we can pay for the thing to be transported. You couldn't pay for us, but the suit in the box, a couple $100 would go.
Michael Bailey Smith hired a publicist for the movie with his own money to help get the movie advertised in articles and magazines. Even though the producers didn't care or communicate with them anymore, the crew forced the movie to get finished and into a watchable state of their own volition because they cared that much. They got as far as setting up a world premiere at the largest shopping mall in the US, the Mall of America, and then the crew got a cease and desist and they were told they weren't allowed to show it.
Well, apparently in this instance, paper beats rock.
They got the same treatment as most fan films, even though they made this as an official product with the license and everything.
He explained it the best way he could because, look, he knew that we had all worked our asses off on this thing. Frankly, I think that they thought it was just going to be this piece of shit, so I think it kind of unnerved them when it wasn't. I think they felt kind of bad.
In addition to seeing the movie itself, I highly recommend the 2015 documentary Doomed for a more in-depth look than I can give for the production and the perspective from the creators. It was an invaluable source for researching this topic, and it's a really great way to know more about the people who put so much blood, sweat, and tears into this project. The real plan all along was for Eichinger to make the movie with unfortunately named director Chris Columbus and have it be an uber-expensive tentpole blockbuster with big-name stars attached. They just ran out of time to get that one in any serious kind of production, and Corman's FF was the reset button for their contract. Dozens of people's lives played with and their hopes crushed for a legal loophole that benefited no one but Eichinger himself. A profoundly selfish and greedy course of action. In 1994, Eichinger signed with Columbus to make a $40 million Fantastic Four. Fellow YouTuber Owen Likes Comics is actually doing a video about the even more ill-fated Chris Columbus Fantastic Four movie that almost happened. Go check it out. Eventually, Eichinger got his wish, and he produced the theatrically released $90 million 2005 Fantastic Four. That's a whole other story. But the contracts for the rights remain the same, a ticking clock that was always counting down to when they'd lose the rights to Marvel Studios. So history repeated itself in 2015. That time to much less charming results. Everyone's favorite producer, Avi Arad, apparently purchased the rights to the 1994 Fantastic Four from Eichinger because he was worried that the film getting released would tarnish the brand. He swears by it to this day that he actually never even watched the movie and then burned the film print. The cast of the film speculate that he still got it somewhere and he's exaggerating, maybe for comedic effect. If that's true and he really did destroy it, then he's a colossal piece of shit, and that's the most anti-art thing you could possibly do as a movie producer. Like, how dare you? People worked hard on that! And if he really is holding a copy in a dusty storage unit somewhere, then I'm on the cast side too. Why not just do some minor cleanup on it and then drop it on a DVD or release it on streaming? Who could it possibly hurt to just let the bird out of the cage at this point? It's been like 30 years. It cost like a couple $100 to re-record all of Dr. Doom's lines with Joseph Culp's voice. Maybe do some minor touch-ups to the sound mix and add some concrete scraping or gravel noises to Ben Grimm moving around to really sell the stone skin effect. You could probably do a better version of the Human Torch scene for pennies using Blender or something. Then it'd get a ton of nerds like me watching it on Disney Plus, and you'd get all the streaming revenue for basically a few weeks worth of work at most. Why the hell not? Honestly, I think they have an obligation to do it. I consider Corman's Fantastic Four an important part of comic book film history, and I think it deserves to be preserved, officially or otherwise if it comes down to it. No official release has ever come out, but Oli speculates that when he had a VHS copy of the film duplicated as a keepsake by a dubbing company, one of the employees there may have made an extra copy and then leaked it from there. Then someone else made a copy of that copy, and much like the South Park Christmas special that preceded the show, it became a pre-internet version of a viral video. Everyone was buying their own bootleg copy. There's a group on YouTube called Anarchy Productions that's actually making an upscaled 4K restoration of one of the best copies available. All of the footage provided for this video is actually from their previous attempt at a restoration, but apparently an even better one is on the way. The people behind this film didn't get the big break they were hoping for, but many of them still went on to have respectable careers in film and television. Alex and Joseph both even got to play small roles in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Despite Corman's Fantastic Four being made for the most evil, scummy, greedy, cynical reasons imaginable, it just does not show in the film itself, because the reasons it was made didn't affect how it was made, and it was created by a small but hard-working team of individuals who wanted nothing more than to create an honest, emotional, exciting, faithful adaptation to the world's greatest comic magazine. So I dedicate this video to them. To the cast and crew of this film, hats off to each and every one of you for making the best of a bad situation and pulling together to create something with an immense amount of heart and dedication to Marvel's first super team. You did the best you could, and all things considered, that was pretty damn good! This is my tribute to a very charming little film that, despite all odds against it, was made with a lot of love. And comic fans and film historians for decades could feel that love in the final film, and have shared it around to give it a legacy that most films like this would never get. While the powers that be tried everything they could to kill Fantastic Four, it just won't stay down. It'll always have a place in our hearts, whether sleazeball executives want it to or not. Fantastic Four can never be buried or forgotten now. This story, while inherently tragic, still gave birth to something that, to this day, is pretty fantastic. I always get mad at YouTube for not putting my videos in the subscription box because people will comment, "Finally, Xavier uploads again after all these years," not knowing 3 other videos came out within the last month already. So maybe that stupid bell icon thing will help you remember I exist. If you want other ways to support the channel, you can always go hit up that Patreon for early videos and exclusive stuff because it's just $1. I'm not kidding, it's only $1. Isn't that cool? If just 5% of the people subscribed to me donated only $1 a month, I could make videos even faster and keep my house. You can also check out our merch on TeePublic, or just buy some of my random stuff on eBay. I have a pretty substantial collection of old toys that are still in the box in perfect condition, so go take a look in case you find something you like. And lastly, since this is a YouTube video and you probably play Fortnite, drop my creator code XavierGM next time you buy a silly dance or a cool character skin. Really helps me out. See you next time!